Welcome back to the Court of Robert Evans, Bastard Guy podcast. Yeah, that's right. I got a gavel, see? Take that, our engineers.
Who
Not
let
gonna be
you
happy.
get a gavel?
I got sent this by the judge who, again, it works exactly like vampires made me. And it's lovely. It's a beautiful gavel. Look at it.
Yeah,
Nice
I can
red
also buy that from like Toys R Us or whatever children's store has survived.
It would mean nothing at all in your hands, Sophie. You haven't gone through the extensive training and preparation to become a United States municipal judge like I have.
Cool. So cool.
Welcome back to Behind the
I
Bastards.
really hate that you have power of any kind.
I know. Tremendous power. Unaccountable power. I'm now eligible for the Supreme Court, although I think technically anyone is.
Fuck. I actually think you would be a... No.
Yeah, I'd be a great Supreme Court judge.
You'd be better than
You'd be a great Supreme Court like 90% of the time, and then 10% of the time you'd be like, I think that everyone should have a personal nuke.
You'd be chaos monster. But the thing.
Of,
I think you'd be better.
There's not going to be any more home invasions, Margaret.
You're better than the 9 we have, you know?
Yeah, that's very true. Quite
that's
accurate.
Probably true. Yeah.
So...
Well, speaking of someone who would have been better on the Supreme Court, Woody Guthrie. That's who we're talking about in part 2 of these episodes.
Yep.
Margaret,
not his dad, though.
Not his Klansman father.
Before we jump into this, though, I wanna plug something really fast, if that's okay. I just want to plug a series that our colleague and my dear friend Jamie Loftus has been doing on her podcast, 16th Minute of Fame. Ever heard of it? About the manosphere. I think the Behind the Bastards audience would really enjoy it. Jamie has worked very hard on it. The writing is incredible. So check that out on 16th Minute of Fame.
Yeah, the manosphere, if you're not aware, is like the kind of colloquial term for this network of far-right, generally like masculinity influencers, all of whom have fed into the Trumpist movement and groups like the Proud Boys. It's a very important like social phenomenon that explains a lot of why we are where we are right now, and Jamie does a great job of breaking it down. So check that out on 16th Minute.
Robert is interviewed on one of the parts.
Yeah, that's sure.
I've only heard part 1 so far.
I am. Well, speaking of part 2, let's do part 2 of these episodes, huh?
Yes,
you know
sir.
what?
I also haven't heard part 2 of this one yet.
Let's kill it. Let's murder it. Let's bury it in the woods, in a tree stump, under a tree stump, so that nobody finds it, and then cash in at Social Security for years. I don't know what I'm doing here, Margaret.
Great.
Part 2. So, Woody Guthrie had wed Mary in 1933, and by 1936, when he quit Texas for California, which is what you have to legally call it when you're talking about the 1930s, she'd had one child with him and was pregnant with another. And he kind of abandons her, like not entirely. Like he's going to, he doesn't like break up with her, and like she eventually moves to California with him, but he does just kind of bounce to go try and find a living, in the West. And this is a thing a lot of guys are doing, and a lot of people have to do. It's also not a thing that the family's thrilled with. The specific project that he left for was a dam that was being built outside of Redding, California, in a place called Happy Valley. I have lived in and around there. I can assure you it is not a particularly happy valley now, and it wasn't one then either. In fact, the name was kind of like ironic, like because it was a shanty town that was miserable.
So like Greenland.
Like Greenland, yes. Anyway, it's I guess probably a better place now, although I can't really, in good conscience, recommend anyone go to Redding. So yeah, anyway, that's where Woody heads up to, and he's there for a little while. And it's in this shanty town with like about 5,000 other work seekers who are all like, showing up to try and queue in lines and get jobs every day, right? And there were a lot of spaces like this around the country. There were a lot of these government these government work camps, basically, right? Which is where Woody is. And there were also, in areas like Sacramento and Seattle, these things called Hoovervilles. And Hoovervilles were essentially large campsites built by homeless workers and their families as they migrated around searching for work during the Great Depression.
It's actually, in the U.S., they're called vacuum towns. Vacuumville.
That was good. That was good, Margaret.
Yeah.
That was good.
Thank you. I'll be here all day.
Electrolux cities. I don't know. I just think it's funny because the old catchphrase was "nothing sucks like an Electrolux," and I've never heard an advertisement that was more clearly made before the internet. You couldn't get away with that today. Or you
no,
could,
although in England they had the
product.
"We put the D in bread" campaign only a couple years ago.
That's pretty funny. That's not bad.
I'm never gonna get over that.
Oh man. So Hoovervilles were named kind of it was an attack on President Herbert Hoover, right? Like that's why they get their name, because he was this will not sound familiar to anything that's about to happen. He was this corrupt Republican president whose policies, which benefited the incredibly wealthy, fed into the Great Depression and like allowed for the kind of deregulation that made it much worse, and were seen as having largely led the country into economic calamity. And so they named these massive camps for like homeless families, basically, Hoovervilles. The largest and longest lasting, I'm not sure if it was absolutely the largest, but it was the longest lasting and among the largest, Hoovervilles, was outside of Seattle. And it stood from 1931 to 1941. As an interesting side note, it was operated on land next to Elliott Bay South, which I believe is where Frasier's condo was meant to be located in the TV series. That doesn't mean anything. I just thought it was interesting. So Woody missed out on the big West Coast Hoovervilles, but he was in and around, Redding is, people who are heading up to Seattle or coming back down from Seattle, he's talking to them. There's a big one in Sacramento, he's talking to them, and he's in this work camp in Happy Valley that's kind of similar to a Hooverville, right? And he's supposed to be up there working on this big dam project, but he doesn't really he does a lot better, and it's a lot more stable for him to just busk for music, right? And so that's what he actually spends most of his time doing. Now, I say he's better at this than he is at laboring. He's not great at it, and he's only able to send the occasional very small money order back home to his wife and 2 kids. So he's out there to be able, the idea is I'm coming out here to support my family, but he's not able to support Mary. She and her now 2 kids are utterly dependent on her parents, which was a very embarrassing situation for her. Mary later said, "I know it upset my dad a lot, my mother too. Woody wasn't doing the manly thing." And I think it's both worth saying that that's her impression and the family's impression of this. This is not an uncommon position for people to be in, and I don't know that Woody was doing very well back in Texas. So it's kind of unclear to me what the right thing to do here was. Ultimately, Woody, like a lot of people, was put in a very difficult situation of trying to do something he hoped would allow him to support his family, and it didn't work very well for a while, right?
It was the Great Depression.
It was the Great Depression, yeah.
We see a lot of this now where like people are like, "Oh, I'm failing under capitalism. I must personally be a failure." And you're like, "No, times are really hard right now."
Well, and we also, on this show, like, we've had like guys like Steven Seagal, who
as a guest,
absolutely, yes, friend of the pod, like absolutely abandoned his family to start his Hollywood career, his entertainment career, and that is a story we've told a few times. Woody is his family feels like he's doing that at the start. That's not actually what he does here, right? Because he's not actually like cutting ties with them, but they're not. Happy
migrant
with
laborers
him
do this all the time today. Like migrant laborers come to the United States, they're not abandoning their family to try and.
But they're usually not going out there to play guitar.
That's fair.
Yeah, I think that's kind of part of why.
Yeah,
because he's not really doing the work that a lot of these other guys were. He's doing some of that, but that's not how he really makes most of his bread.
Yeah.
So in short order, Woody left Redding for Glendale, which I've also done, and I can tell you, good call. Much better place to be than Redding. He vaguely knew that he had an aunt in the area, and as was often the case, he just sort of, like, they're not like sending letters usually back and forth. They certainly don't have phones or whatever. You're usually just like, I was told once by a relative that I have an aunt in Glendale. I'm just going to show up and figure out where she is, and hopefully she'll take me in. And social ties were such that when he shows up on her doorstep, she's like, all right. He is 25 years old when he makes it to the Los Angeles area. After several months of stress and internal recriminations, because Woody's not thrilled with himself either. He had wanted to be doing better. He knows how little he's sending back to his family. He's not happy about this. He gets a lucky break, courtesy of his cousin Leon, who everyone else either called Jack or Okie Guthrie. And Okie is like it's kind of a pejorative term for someone from Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Both was used as an insult and also as like a term of pride by people from Oklahoma, right? The Guthries are all Okies, right? So calling him Okie Guthrie must have been a little bit confusing to like Woody, who is also an Okie.
Uh-huh.
Jack and his family had left home back at the start of the Depression and moved to Sacramento. Like many Guthries, he was musically talented, and so was his wife, and they'd built a reputation for themselves as good musicians and performers. He suggested teaming up with Woody to try and start an act in Los Angeles. This was not the obviously good idea that it would later seem, as Ed Cray explains in the book Ramblin' Man. Jack was a Western singer. His songs were heavily influenced by popular music. Woody was a country singer, his music born of an older oral tradition. In practice, they could neither sing nor play guitar together. Indeed, Woody privately despised the treacly sentiment of Jack's sagebrush serenades. Jack the guitarist used the jazz-influenced chords of popular music and played up the neck of the instrument. Woody disdained chords beyond the minimal tonic, subdominant, and dominant. So this is not a great pairing. And Woody's a little bit of like... He's a little bit of a snob, right? He's like, oh, your music's all popular and jazzy. You're not doing the cool punks. It's not really punk, but it's very similar in attitude to that kind of guy, right?
I mean, he's doing folk punk before it's folk punk. He's doing folk punk,
right? Yeah, at least he's about to be starting to do folk punk.
It's interesting because country western, I had never occurred to me that those were separate categories.
Yes, yeah, because I mean, it's this mix of these songs that are like folk songs that we would call Western because they're like songs about the West and about, being a cowboy or whatever. And songs that are like Western songs that are made for like the different kinds of like floor shows and entertainment, radio and whatnot that's popular at the time. Like those are kind of different beasts. So in better times, these guys probably would never have worked together, but desperation made, some kind of collaboration necessary. And they developed a fairly successful act and were able to book recurring gigs on the radio through a station called KFVD. Woody found himself increasingly drawn to folk music with a sense of class consciousness, like Goebel Reeves' 1934 tune, Hobo's Lullaby. And here's Woody Guthrie singing a portion of Hobo's Lullaby, which is, again, a song by another guy, and this is a folk song. It's also kind of punk, as you'll catch from this section.
Oh, I used to listen to it while riding trains. My friend
there
would play
you
it
go.
on guitar.
We'll play it for the audience.
I know the police cause you trouble. They cause trouble everywhere. But when you die and go to heaven, you'll find no policeman there. So go to sleep, you weary hobo.
That's good. That's a good little bar. So I would also be remiss, because that's pretty cool, if I didn't expound on the fact that racism, too, was a recurrent part of Woody's act and often on his mind while living in Echo Park and fighting on behalf of poor white people, because he's like an activist, helping do rent strikes type stuff, right? Like he is an advocate for like poor downtrodden white people living in Los Angeles. He also is drawing cartoons of people he called jungle blacks and monkeys. And
God.
Like, that's bad. He wrote poems so racist that I don't even feel like I should describe them on the air to you. They're bad.
Oh, God.
I found a good LA Weekly article on the subject by an author named Johnny Whiteside, and I'm going to read a quote from it now. Broadcasting on Pasadena's KFVD, Guthrie often indulged in on-air employ of ebonics and was stunned when a black listener characterized the singer as unintelligent after hearing Guthrie perform songs with titles like Run, Inward, Run and Inward Blues. Fortunately for Guthrie, recordings of these tunes do not survive. Later, Guthrie said, "A young Negro in Los Angeles wrote me a nice letter one day telling me the meaning of that word, the N-word, and that I shouldn't say it anymore on the air, so I apologized. He next tore all the N-word songs out of his songbook." So, you can take that however you want, right? That's not the fact that he is singing that kind of stuff on the air and like just writing poems about it. Not great, but he's also not unable to change or immune to criticism. So he's willing to like listen to this criticism that a black man gives him and be like, oh, you know what? That is kind of fucked up. And that ain't nothing for the son of a Klansman, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Huh.
You know, again, that's kind of up to your personal take, but I think when it comes down to when we talk about like, how do you judge people, you know, to what extent do you judge them based on their time or based on some sort of concept of objective morality? One thing that always matters to me is where did they start versus where did they end up, right? Because, someone who was raised in a slaveholding household and becomes an abolitionist, but is still racist, is a lot more impressive to me than a guy who just like isn't outwardly racist because he grew up in the 1990s, but like crosses the street when he sees a black guy, right?
Totally.
Like one of those is more like, because one of those is a person who like went on a journey, recognized a bad thing about themselves and made changes, you know? And there's
there's people that like will never get my pronouns right who I suspect would kill someone who tried to hurt me. And there's other people who would absolutely always get my pronouns right and be super respectful and would be like, oh, no, a bad thing is happening if they watch me get murdered in front of them, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And
I'm not trying to be like, it's therefore okay. Like, I'm not trying to.
There's a reason I included this because it's pretty bad and you should know that about the guy.
Yeah. No, I'm not trying to. Yeah.
But it's not with it. This is not a part of his entire life or his whole creative life. He writes anti-racist songs later in life. Like, it does seem like he makes a change. And I do think it's worth noting, like, this is a guy who was raised by a Klansman in like the 20s and 30s, you know? So, you know, again, you can figure out morally wherever you want to figure that out. But I do think it's worth kind of looking at the whole sweep of the personal journey the man went on there. In 1937, Woody's wife, Mary, and 2 children moved to Los Angeles to be with him. Jack wound up leaving the act and show business for a while, but Woody paired up with Maxine Chrisman, whose family was friends with his cousin and had taken Woody in too. He dubbed Maxine Lefty Lou. The two played songs by other artists that spoke to the poor and downtrodden, like Hobo's Lullaby. But they also started playing Woody's original compositions, like the Talking Dust Bowl Blues. This song really embodies what people were starting to love about Woody. His music had a warts-and-all description of life during the Depression and the struggles of the hundreds of thousands of people who were forced to move west during the Dust Bowl. He sung about relatable, nuts-and-bolts issues that are still familiar to a lot of people today. If you were a poor punk kid who lived on a semi-permanent road trip for a while, basically, and had the experience of trying to coast by turning your car off on downhill runs because you can't afford gasoline, here's Woody Guthrie singing about the same thing.
Way up yonder on a mountain curve, it's way up yonder in the piney wood, and I give that rolling Ford a shove, and I was gonna coast as far as I could. Commenced coasting, picking up speed. Was a hairpin turn. I didn't make it. Man alive, I'm a-telling you, the fiddles and the guitars really flew. That Ford took off like a flying squirrel, and it flew halfway around the world. Scattered wives and children's all over the side of that mountain.
Oh, man. I don't know why.
I love his talking blues.
Yeah, I love his talking. I love the way he says children. Like, it just tickles the hell out of me. It reminds me of the good parts of living in fucking middle of nowhere, Oklahoma. Like, I do like that about him. And you know what I like even more, Margaret?
Is it the sponsors of the show?
Yes.
They're all great.
They're all great, and they've all had the experience of having to coast in their Ford truck to save gas money, too. Look, it's hard times for everyone, even large brands.
They've probably driven stuff off of the road before.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. You know, we could talk about what truck drivers are forced to do in order to make their times. Anyway, whatever. We're done. Margaret!
Yes!
I do find it fun how much of like his Dust Bowl songs are very relatable to like punk life today.
Yeah. Totally.
Hate the cops, fucking coasting in my car, camping out in the woods and shit. Like,
No, go. Sorry.
No, sorry. That was it.
Did he do Big Rock Candy Mountains, or is this someone else?
Oh God, in my head he did Big Rock Candy Mountains, but I didn't double check on that.
I mean, he might have just sung it.
He definitely. I'm fairly certain I've heard a version of the song by him, but I'm not 100% on that.
One of the first
Harry McClintock who's the guy who first recorded and wrote it. Yeah. Okay.
One of the first people I ever rode trains with. I haven't ridden trains nearly as much as it's going to make it sound like when I do these episodes, but was this folk singer named Ryan Harvey. And so that's why I have a lot of these associations with riding trains in particular. But we used to sit around and sing Big Rock Candy Mountains, but change the words very slightly to be like modern anarchy. And you didn't have to change much. And my favorite was, and the hens lay vegan eggs was my favorite line.
That's good. Oh, man, that's funny.
You're like, wait a second.
Yeah. And the police dogs can't sniff your weed.
Yeah, totally.
So, Woody had attained a degree of local fame by 38, 39, right? 1938 to 1939. He's doing reasonably well. In fact, he and Lefty Lou were so beloved that the radio station where they played received thousands of fan letters over the course of just a few months. They were doing okay in terms of money, but not great because, again, he has a lot of fans, but they're broke-ass Dust Bowl refugees.
Yeah.
So he's not getting rich off these people, right? And he's also not very interested in getting rich. He seemed to feel like he had a responsibility to reach and provide relief for his people, suffering in government work camps and embarrassed by their situation. From a write-up by the Library of Congress, quote, he also sang at government camps that gave these people some measure of dignity, health, and safety. Joining him was Will Geer, an actor and earnest left-winger who helped Woody better understand the injustice of an economic system that would allow Americans to live in such poverty. And this is where he starts getting pilled on socialism, right? And eventually becomes a communist. He will call himself a card-carrying communist. As we'll talk about, he never actually has a card, and he could have gotten one. But Woody's a little bit of a fabulist, right? He lies a little bit. Not in a way that is massively meaningful, because he was a communist and very committed, but, he's a little bit of a tall tale spinner. So... yeah, it's to his credit that he's, again, rather than focusing on making money off of this growing fame, he's giving a lot of free shows to provide relief for his people, right? He is very dedicated to his people in a way that I think is pretty admirable. Woody's popularity and by now fairly mature class consciousness started to make him more connections with the radical political set, including various left-wing writers, journalists, and socialist and communist activists. He began writing songs that spoke not just of left-wing politics, but of the rage of the working class and increasingly his own hatred of the people that maintained the system that kept his people downtrodden. In 1939, he wrote one of his most famous songs, The Ballad of Pretty Boy Floyd, about an Oklahoma outlaw active in the early 1930s, who regular listeners will know was my cousin. Now, my great-grandmother knew him as a girl. I grew up hearing songs about him from her. And my family, they're very, as I talk about often, very conservative people. But my grandma particularly would always tell us, you got outlaw blood in you, right? Like it was something she was very proud of in a way that's a little weird if you heard the way these people tended to talk about other like urban crime, right? Mm-hmm. The outlaw crime was very different to them, and I'm talking particularly my relatives who were survivors of the Great Depression. Outlaws are very different than modern criminals in their eyes, right? Yeah. I'm not saying that's actually a fair, but their conception of these people is extremely different. And a big part of why is not just Woody, but songs like this that Woody made who turned these guys who were bank robbers and gangsters into Robin Hood figures, right? And Floyd was a fairly easy one to turn into a Robin Hood character because he kind of was at least a little bit that guy. There's a debate as to like how much of that sort of character was real and how much of it is kind of myth-making that Floyd did, but some of it's certainly true. Floyd was born in Georgia, but had moved with his family to Aikens, Oklahoma in 1911, and his career as a criminal had started early when he was arrested at age 18 for stealing $3.50 worth of, I think, stamps from a post office. A few years later, he robbed a payroll in St. Louis. So he goes from like stamp theft to armed robbery fairly quickly. And he does 3 years or so in prison for that. After he's released, he becomes a Kansas City area bank robber. And he one thing you get about Floyd is he doesn't seem to have ever considered not being a criminal.
Yeah. He
just
found
immediately
this thing
like,
that sort
no.
of works.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it didn't really work. That's the other weird thing about it.
No, but he never really thinks about doing anything but being an outlaw. And he quickly he starts robbing banks in Kansas City, and he earns the nickname Pretty Boy, which eventually becomes Pretty Boy Floyd, because people thought he was very good looking. He hated this nickname. I will show you. Sophie's going to pull up a picture of the man. You can decide yourself how good looking he was.
It's just a picture of Luigi.
Americans do love their sexy criminals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. Not my type, but
the standards were not as high back then.
He's got like a
got a nice
soft
jaw.
gaze that's kind of nice,
Yeah. Prominent nose, good jawline.
He's not bad.
He is
looking.
Certainly not.
Yeah.
Nice hair. Yeah. He is a hardened criminal.
He's better looking at Woody Guthrie if we go to AB real quick.
He killed at least one federal agent. He also killed the sheriff of McIntosh County. Other members of his gang killed several police officers and other criminals as well. There are multiple police officer murders that he is also a suspect in that we don't fully know. Did he kill all those cops? But he killed a number of cops, Like, he shoots a lot of police. In the early Depression years, he took to robbing banks in Oklahoma, where in addition to taking money for himself, he would destroy mortgage documents in order to free poor farmers from debt. We don't fully know if this happened, right? It's not the kind of thing. How would you prove it, for one thing, right? People told stories about it. I will tell you that everyone I knew in the towns in Oklahoma, like where he had been active, and again, including my family members who knew him, would tell you that this is what he did. I don't know. It's not provable. It's one of those things where it would make sense for him to do it even if he was not really morally a Robin Hood character. Right. Because it's smart. If you're destroying people's mortgages, they will hide you from the cops.
Yeah. I could tie this back to Italy. In the 1870s, Malatesta and all these other anarchists in Italy, in the Benevento province, would go, and their idea of how to do propaganda of the deed was to go and they'd march on these small towns and they would destroy the tax and ownership records. And they were like, and then everyone would come out and be like, "You have freed us." The priest was like, came out of the church and was like, "These people have been sent by God to free us." And then they all got arrested. But they actually only spent like a year in jail because everyone was going so crazy in Italy at that point that they were like, we better just let these people out.
Yeah, we can't go too hard on these people. Everyone really likes them for some reason.
Yeah. And so that's like, there is a specific point in if you're going to be a criminal, if you go hard enough and make everyone like you, there's a certain safety in that.
One of my favorite Floyd stories is that he had a gang, and his gang decided they wanted to rob a bunch of people on like Black Wall Street at one point, which was very well armed. And Floyd was like, "Well, you guys can go do that. I'm not fucking with that." Like, that seems like and sure enough, they got fucking like shot to pieces.
Yeah.
So he was a smart man.
Yeah.
My other favorite story about him is I mentioned once in my high school AP English class that he was a cousin of mine. And my teacher, who was, in her 50s or something, said, "He shot my grandfather in the leg."
Oh, what grade did you get in that class, buddy?
No, she was like, "It's okay." Again, because she was raised in this same culture. She was like, "It's okay." Like, Pretty Boy said, "No, move," and my grandpa moved. He didn't kill him. He just shot him in the leg a little.
So funny.
Again, there's a lot of tolerance for these specific sorts of outlaws in that part of the South. Like, it's
that you probably wouldn't find today. Just to be clear, anyone listening, that you probably wouldn't find today.
You will not find today. So again, fascinating character. I can't say how much of the whole Robin Hood thing is true, but I think a lot of the Robin Hood image that he has comes from Woody. Although it's also worth noting, he is part of why it takes so long for him to get caught, because he's like one of the last gangsters to get caught and killed by the government. His death is generally agreed to have heralded the end of the gangster era.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think 34 is when he's gunned down. And like, there's a lot of stories of him like hiding with little old ladies and lying to the cops. And then when he like leaves, there's a $100 bill under the plate where she'd fed him dinner or something like that. So in 1939, about 5 years after his death, when memories of this guy are still very strong, Woody writes the song that is very much responsible for crystallizing this image of Pretty Boy Floyd as this kind of like bandit outlaw king of the American South. And we're just going to listen to that song because it's Christmas and it's a song about my cousin.
Hell yeah.
If you'll gather round me, children, a story I will tell about Pretty Boy Floyd, an outlaw. Oklahoma knew him well. It was in the town of Shawnee, a Saturday afternoon. His wife beside him in his wagon, as into town they rode. There a deputy sheriff approached him in a manner rather rude, with vulgar words of anger, and his wife she overheard. Pretty Boy grabbed a log chain and the deputy grabbed his gun. In the fight that followed, he laid that deputy down. Then he took to the trees and timber to live a life of shame. Every crime in Oklahoma was added to his name. But of many a starving farmer the same old story told, how the outlaw paid their mortgage and saved their little homes. Others tell you about a stranger that come to beg a meal. Underneath his napkin left $1,000 bill. It was in Oklahoma City. It was on a Christmas day. There was a whole carload of groceries come with a note to say, well, you say that I'm an outlaw, you say that I'm a thief. Here's a Christmas dinner for the families on relief. Yes, as through this world I've wandered, I've seen lots of funny men. Some will rob you with a 6-gun and some with a fountain pen. And as through your life you travel, yes, as through your life you roam, you won't never see an outlaw drive a family from their home.
I love the way that song ends.
It's beautiful. Anderson likes it too.
Some will rob you with a 6-gun and some with a fountain pen.
That's a line I hear all over the place.
It's a great fucking. I mean, this is one of his more famous songs.
Yeah.
But it's a damn good line.
I enjoyed that.
I also
thoroughly.
like that. Look, I've seen a lot of outlaws. I'm not defending the things they've done, but it's not the outlaws I see forcing people to be homeless.
Yep.
That's the banks.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway.
Thank you, Anderson.
So look, I disagree with my family about a lot, but our shared pride in our cop-killing ancestor is not one of those things.
Yeah.
Anyway, as is often the case for people who come to Los Angeles for the music industry, Woody wound up having to take his family back home to Texas and then leave them again to move to New York City in 1940, chasing what had become for him a dream of folk stardom. By this point, he'd become a little bit of a legend, enough that the Library of Congress had him sit down and record his Dust Bowl songs for posterity. He laid down tracks with Pete Seeger and became an influential part of the urban folk revival of the time. In a letter to Alan Lomax, another influential pillar of the urban folk revival, he described his thoughts on what folk music ought to be. And I'm interested for your thoughts on this, Margaret.
Okay.
A folk song is what's wrong and how to fix it, or it could be who's hungry and where their mouth is, or who's out of work and where the job is, or who's broke and where the money is, or who's carrying a gun and where the peace is. That's folklore, and folks made it up because they seen that the politicians couldn't find nothing to fix, or nobody to feed, or give a job of work.
That's good. It's so interesting to me because if you say folk music in different places, you mean something so completely different, right? American folk music is this like Woody Guthrie kind of vibe thing, whereas in almost any other country, you're looking at stuff that's a little bit more like technically interesting, like musically.
Yes.
Like, I don't know. I have a lot of thoughts about like folk and folk instrumentation and music and all that, but I think what he's describing is great. And specifically that thing that it's just like, this is the stuff that people make up, it's not fancy. Yeah.
It's how poor people without really any other idea of how to have a voice talk about, in a lot of ways, the kind of issues that today we ascribe to like the job of journalists, right? Who was hungry and where their mouth is, who's carrying a gun and where the peace is, right?
Yeah, totally.
It's how
it's
people...
gossip.
Yes, it's gossip and it's agitation, right? Yeah. You look at a lot of folk songs and a lot of folk stories, and that's that's the first safe place to attack the wealthy and the powerful, right? Totally. A little bit, Totally. Oftentimes, there's also plenty of folk stuff that reinforces some of those things, but it is where you see a lot of subversive stuff.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing about like populist and popular stuff is it can really go either way.
Yeah.
But it's like, still on some fundamental level interesting.
Yeah. Now, it's worth spending some time on just how radically folk music changes. As you noted, in other countries, it's very different. And part of why it's different in the U.S. is Woody Guthrie. He changes what folk music is in the United States in a fundamental way. In an article for The New Yorker, David Hajdu writes, quote, "Folk music, including country, blues, and other vernacular styles, was supposed to be anonymous, a collective art passed along orally from singer to singer, generation to generation, sometimes culture to culture. From the vantage point of today, when kids with their first guitar start writing songs before they learn to play other tunes, it is difficult to process how exceptional it was for a folk artist such as Woody Guthrie to have created a vast repertoire of deeply idiosyncratic works. Many Tin Pan Alley, Broadway, and Hollywood songwriters of the 30s and earlier were as skilled and prolific as Guthrie, but they were working in a different vein, writing to order for professional singers. Guthrie brought the authorial imperative to vernacular music in America." And I think that's also very interesting.
My just to keep going with all the weird family connections, my great grandfather was a Tin Pan Alley songwriter, and he just wrote music that he didn't own the copyright to. He wrote the B-sides for more popular musicians,
that makes total sense. I'm not surprised that that's your family connection.
Yeah.
So, by this point in time, Woody was what you would call a left-wing radical, although not, again, a card-carrying one. He played benefits for and was associated with the American Communist Party, but he never got around to joining, and you'll find several different theories as to why. The leading one that you'll hear is that he liked his independence a little too much to be a joiner. Now, this sounds good, especially to people like you and me, but it leaves out a crucial fact, which is that Woody was his era's equivalent of like a tankie, right?
Totally.
He was, it also leaves out the fact that he vocally claimed to have a card, claimed to be a member of the party, right? And that it was the best thing he'd done, which he hadn't. And he wasn't immune to the worst impulses of the American left during this period. He had been enthusiastic about FDR early on, but once the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was signed and the USSR locked into a treaty with the Nazis, he attacked Roosevelt as, quote, Churchill's lapdog for his anti-Nazi stance and support of Great Britain during the early months of the war. He argued that the developing World War was a capitalist fraud. When Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union invaded Poland together, Guthrie supported Stalin to an extent and with such vociferousness that biographer Will Kaufman called it shocking. In Ramblin' Man, Ed Craig goes into more detail about a left-wing anti-war song he wrote called Why Do You Stand There in the Rain, based on the title of a New York Post article. And I'm going to read from that section from Ramblin' Man here. Just days before, some 6,000 delegates of the American Youth Congress had gathered in Washington to advocate jobs and peace. At the invitation of First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, the delegates gathered in front of the south portico of the White House in a cold drizzle to listen to a half-hour speech by the president. FDR threw down the gauntlet, aware that the Young Communist League had taken firm grip on the once broadly based Popular Front AYC, the Soviet Union, as everyone who has the courage to face the fact knows, is run by a dictatorship and as absolute as any dictatorship in the world. It has allied itself with another dictatorship and has invaded a neighbor, Finland, so infinitesimally small that it could do no conceivable harm to the Soviet Union, a neighbor which seeks only to live in peace as a democracy, and a liberal, forward-looking democracy at that. Roosevelt heard the boos and hisses through the cold rain. People's World columnist Woody Guthrie knew where he stood. He chided the president in song. Now the guns in Europe roar as they have so oft before, and the warlords play the same old game again. They butcher and they kill. Uncle Sam foots the bill, with his own dear children standing in the rain. Why do you stand there in the rain? Why do you stand there in the rain? These are strange carrying on, the White House Capitol lawn. Tell me, why do you stand there in the rain? Then the president's voice did ring. Why, this is the silliest thing I have heard in all my 58 years of life. But it just stands to reason as he passes another season, he'll be smarter by the time he's 59. So he's being like real shitty to Roosevelt there specifically about his support of England in the war that is developing, and very defensive of the USSR and invading a much smaller neighbor and invading Poland. And it's one of those things where this is both like horrifying given what we know happens. You have to an extent, while still saying he was wrong, look at his level of knowledge and what had actually happened previously. World War I was the touchstone here. And in World War I, the U.S. did enable further butchering, right? Like we were arming and profiting off of a hideous war that we had no business sticking our noses into. Yeah. And he's pissed about that. It's also, there's a lot less information about what was going on in the Soviet Union. Now, I will also say more than enough that he should have known, right?
I mean, the internationalist newspaper stuff was pretty...
Yeah.
Sometimes they were better at knowing what was going on around the world than like a modern leftist is today. But he's holding the party line. They got told very specifically. Like, I mean, this is the problem with the Comintern, the Communist International, is that literally someone in the American Communist Party during this era is literally taking orders from Russia.
Yeah.
And that's like one of the parts that we don't want to talk about with the Red Scare, because the Red Scare was bad, right?
Yeah.
But when they're like, oh, these foreign agents acting under a foreign national, they were.
I mean, they were. There was literally like they were taking direct like propaganda, direct orders, like from Moscow, because not from Moscow, but like from the Communist Party in the Soviet Union, and they were really wrong on some things as a result of that, because it turns out Hitler's not an ally of international communism.
It turns out
no, that goes very badly, very quickly.
Yeah.
And Woody had been describing himself as an anti-fascist at this point, but also I think he probably would have said that like, well, the Communist Party knows its business. If they think that's what they've got to do to secure themselves, what matters is, the survival of communism, which, at that point had weathered a number of attacks from the international capitalist community, like during the Russian Civil War. I think that's probably how, and I'm not saying that because I think that's a good argument. I'm saying I think that's he would have made.
Yeah.
I'm pretty firmly on the stance of Stalin bad. And
yeah.
The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact inexcusable.
Yeah.
But also I always emphasize inexcusable on behalf of the Soviet leadership. I've got nothing but respect for the guys who wound up dying by the millions to stop the Nazis.
Absolutely.
Totally in the right, those guys.
Yeah.
And ladies.
Yeah.
So it is impossible to look at this situation without seeing commonalities between more modern failures of the left to condemn dictators seen as anti-imperialist for very flawed reasons. I might suggest that we also not forget at the time, one of the complicating factors here is how the U.S. government deals with what it considers communism and what things it considers communism, right? Because that's important too. Woody had an extensive FBI file, and in 1941, after he joined the Merchant Marine, one of his shipmates was cited as saying Woody, quote, followed the Communist Party line and that they were very pro-Russian and advocated racial intermarriage. So again, that is what the guy who informs on him and the FBI considers evidence of his communist sympathies, is he thinks that black people and white people should be able to get married. So keep that in mind, too.
Yeah. The Communist Party was absolutely right about racial politics in the United States during this era.
100%.
And they were one of the only non-black organizations. It was actually heavily black, but one of the only not majority black organizations that was right about this.
Yes. And so, like, when we talk about, like, criticizing him, don't leave out the fact that he's also very much correct about this.
Right, totally.
After the war, he would be accused by the California State Senate's far-right Committee on Un-American Activities for being Joe Stalin's California mouthpiece, which was at one point true, but also for being a member of a factionalist sabotage group, which was absurd. Woody never sought or attempted to do anything but sing songs and write articles for socialist papers. He was not sabotaging anything.
I have a feeling the reason he didn't get a card is he was like, I don't want to be on that list.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I mean that may have been it. I think he also just might have been too lazy.
Yeah, didn't want to pay the fees, whatever.
He's an artist. He's not good at signing papers.
Yeah.
Margaret Guthrie, who is his second wife, he starts a family with her after he divorces his first wife, Mary, and moves to Coney Island, sums things up this way. I don't know what happened prior to my time, but from my time in Coney Island, he was not welcomed by the party because he didn't want to follow a party line. You couldn't tell Woody what to think, and so we were not members of the party in Coney Island. And I include that because she was his wife, she knew him, but also that isn't entirely true because he certainly followed the party line on some very fucked up things.
But actually, that's still like, even when we talk about the way that people have arcs, right? One of the things I've read a lot about the UK communists at this era, where a lot of the communists left the Communist Party once they realized that they were just being mouthpieces for Stalin,
Yeah. So, I mean, and people do go through, and again, there is a degree to which the fact that there's so much disinformation being pumped out about the Soviet Union, there's so much people, it's certainly more reasonable than for someone to doubt a lot of the official narratives coming out and to doubt a lot of the information that makes Stalin look bad from their position in the United States, right?
Totally.
Again, I think enough that a man as obviously intelligent as Woody should have been better informed, but he's not the only one who makes this mistake, and it's a more understandable mistake then than it is now, is what I'll say.
That's totally
without
legit.
Forgiving it, you know. So, however you want to mark this down morally for Woody, his following that the U.S. shouldn't be getting into this capitalist war. They're all cooking this World War II thing up. That attitude ends for Woody on June 22nd, 1941, when Nazi Germany invades the Soviet Union. This is Operation Barbarossa. Woody ran to his friend Pete Seeger after this breaks and told him, well, I guess we're not going to be singing any more of them peace songs. Woody was not the only man forced to change his tune rapidly due to world events. Winston Churchill.
His tune. Anyway.
Yeah.
Well done.
Winston Churchill, who was one of the world's loudest anti-communists, was forced by sheer necessity to make temporary amends and even express support for the cause of Soviet soldiers. When Woody heard this, he told a friend, "Churchill's flip-flopped. We got to flip-flop too." You know who doesn't flip-flop, though, Margaret?
The consistency with which our sponsors provide high-quality goods and services.
That's right. That's right. Our sponsors have never once changed their opinion, which is why today, tomorrow, and forever, they advise you to vote Millard Fillmore for president. We're back. Our sponsors are all old hair tonics from the 1800s. Anyway, vote Fillmore. So Woody was not the only... Oh, right. I already read that. So much of the Woody that we know, the famous Woody Guthrie, you know, you brought up as soon as I said, what do you know of him, that the picture of him with a guitar that has a "This Machine Kills Fascists" sticker slapped across it.
Yeah.
By the way, that sticker was like put out by the U.S. government.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it was a propaganda.
Strange
it was a good piece of
propaganda.
Yeah. There were a lot of machines we were using to kill fascists. Perfectly reasonable to put some stickers on them.
Wait, did they? Oh, that was like the government was putting that on machines to raise morale, and he took one of those and was like, "I'm putting this on my guitar."
I think it's something like that. I read it in that article in, I think, LA Weekly by the fellow who was writing about like Woody's history with racism, where he was like, this thing was like a product of the government that he...
That makes so much sense. I never quite understood that. I always really liked, though, when people carve into their AKs wooden stock, "This machine makes folk music."
Yeah, no, there's been some good ones of that coming out of Syria. Yeah. Anyway, he changes his opinion very rapidly. And once the Nazis invade the USSR, he starts getting much more patriotic. The anti-fascist, and again, he had been making anti-Nazi music and been anti-Nazi prior to this, and if you're saying, well, that's incoherent for him to be against the war and, you know, whatnot. Yes, lots of people have incoherent politics. But his politics get a lot more cohesive after Operation Barbarossa. An article for OklahomaHistory.org notes, in New York, he appeared on numerous popular radio shows before joining the Merchant Marines with Cisco Houston during World War II. Guthrie was on 3 torpedoed ships, and the day Germany surrendered, he was drafted into the U.S. Army.
Like he was on ships that were hit by torpedoes three different times?
He is, and the Merchant Marine is effectively a part of the military during a war, right? He is a combat veteran. Yeah. You know, like that's like he's on 3 ships that get hit.
Yeah.
Now he's not in the Army very long. It basically immediately gets out because the war ends. But yeah, he does like his bit. You know, he is not when we play songs of his where he's talking about wanting to fight the fascists, he goes and does it. You know. Yeah. He is doing an important, dangerous job where he gets shot at. So you cannot, he's very willing to put his skin in the game.
Yeah, one blown up ship. If you quit after one blown up ship, no one's mad. You did your part.
Yeah, nobody will call you a coward.
Yeah.
I don't know that. Yeah. And so from late 1941 to the end of the war, Woody Guthrie wrote several iconic anti-fascist anthems, including Reuben James, about a U.S. destroyer that was torpedoed and sunk by the Nazis in 1941. As you might expect from Woody and the kind of songs he wrote, this song focused on the lives and deaths of normal men at war. The refrain went, "Tell me what was their names, tell me what was their names. Did you have a friend on that good Reuben James?" It's a good song, but if you want my personal favorite War Years Woody Guthrie song, nothing beats this particular banger. And I'm going to put this up now, or Sophie's going to put it up now.
Put it there, boy, and we'll show these fascists what a couple of hillbillies can do. Well, I'm going to tell you, fascists, you may be surprised. People in this world are getting organized. You're bound to lose. You fascists bound to lose. All you fascists bound to lose. I said, all you fascists bound to lose. Yes, sir. All you fascists bound to lose. You're bound to lose. You fascists bound to lose. There's people of every nation marching side by side, marching across the fields where million fascists died, you're bound to lose. You fascists bound to lose. All of you fascists bound to lose. Yes, all of you fascists bound to lose. All of you fascists bound to lose. You're bound to lose. You fascists bound to lose. I said all of you fascists bound to lose. Yes, all of you fascists bound to lose. All of you fascists bound to lose. You're bound to lose. You fascists bound to lose.
Banger.
Music.
It's so good.
Yeah, it's a real banger.
I enjoyed that immensely.
Yeah, one of my favorites. So near the end of Woody's wartime experiences, he would record the first official version of a song that he'd been working on since 1940, This Land Is Your Land, which would go on to be undoubtedly his most famous work of music. It is definitely the one Woody Guthrie song everyone's fucking heard. Like, you basically can't get through school without hearing This Land Is Your Land.
Because it was so easily recuperated.
Yes. And in the decades since 1944, it's also been criticized for what many people interpret as an era of imperialism and support for manifest destiny, which is definitely present in the version of the song that is commonly sung. Given this, I think it's interesting to actually look into why Woody wrote the song and what its original lyrics were. This Land Is Your Land was initially something of a folk music diss track. It was a response to Irving Berlin's God Bless America. This is a song Berlin wrote in 1918 after being drafted and re-released in 1941 as something of a cash grab. The lyrics, if you aren't familiar, go like this. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. Woody fucking hated this song, and it's good he did because it's a fucking dog shit song. He considered it far too sweet a hymn for a nation that had just sent millions of its citizens into a depression. This Land Is Your Land was meant to be a retort, discussing the real America that Irving had tried to conceal. The original title was God Bless America for Me. Joe Riley writes of this first version of the song, quote, "It was more of a question than affirmation. In fact, it was a sarcastic retort. Woody later changed the refrain to, This land was made for you and me, and the song to, This land is your land. The verses he ultimately omitted from the final draft of the song include this banger. There was a big high wall there that tried to stop me. The sign was painted, said private property, but on the backside it didn't say nothing. This land was made for you and me. In the squares of the city, in the shadow of the steeple, near the relief office, I see my people, and some are a-grumbling and some are wondering if this land's still made for you and me." And that's a banger. That's very much not an imperialist song. That's more him talking about, like, the people that this country ought to be for are the ones being harmed by the system that governs it, right? Like, that's the original point of the song. That said, this is not a case of it being recuperated by someone else who changes the lyrics because they think that they can tweak it. They don't like Woody's original version.
Right.
Woody changes it, right? And he changes it. He removes that verse about the relief office because late in the war, he decided it was too pessimistic. And he replaces it with lines like, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream waters, this land was made for you and me, which is not all that different from like some of the stuff Irving had been writing, right? The song becomes a massive hit. It is practically a new national anthem, and Woody does not initially bother to copyright it because this is, that's not uncommon for him, right? Mm-hmm. He generally neglected to do that. Alas for Woody, the post-war optimism faded quickly. So the first horrible thing that happens to Woody after the war, because things go downhill for him quickly. In February of 1947, there is an electrical fire in his home, and his little girl, Kathy Ann, dies.
Oh God, he has bad luck with fire.
Like I said, he had horrible luck with fire. Now he and Marjorie have 3 other kids, but yeah, like that's obviously really fucks him up. Like that same year, 47, and then in 48, he gets repeatedly attacked as a communist, both in the State Committee of Un-American Activities in California and in the House of Representatives Committee on Un-American Activities. Now, They were attacking him for being a communist, and he was, but he was not un-American. No one was more American than Woody fucking Guthrie.
Right.
He suffers as a result of this. He gets blacklisted. He had written an autobiographical novel at this point called Bound for Glory that had been set to be turned into a major Hollywood production. But that deal and others like it fell apart. As unions were forced to take anti-communist stances in this new, more paranoid era, Woody stopped getting hired to play the events that had largely supplemented his income. Rather than fold, as many did, and denounce the things that he believed, Woody spoke out constantly against J. Edgar Hoover, writing at one point, quote, "The roaches crawl across my page tonight and make a noise that makes more sense than all that Hoover writes." Which is a good bar. He became less dogmatic on the Moscow line as well, although he never stops being a communist. He starts writing that his goal was to, quote, "get this thing called socialism nailed and hammered up just as quickly as he can," and praises Eugene V. Debs, former chairman of the Socialist Party, as, quote, "a pure cross between Jesus Christ and Abe Lincoln." Which again is not really something that the Moscow Party wants you saying.
Yeah.
Despite the consequences to his career, he continues to seek and sing his mind. Quote, "Fascism is being afraid. Fascism is fear bossing you. Fascism is worse than all of these things, and fascism is more closer to you than I can make you see. I'm trying to wake you up and tell you that you're sleeping with something 10 times more dangerous than a poison-fanged snake in your bed. If fascism does come, and if it does kill me, well, then you add me alone onto the hundreds of millions which fascism has already dusted under, and it don't scare me so very much."
That rules.
Yeah, it's a good line.
All right, it might kill me. It's killed millions of people before. So
I'll be in good company.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's hard. I like that.
Yep. That's hard. And this is unfortunately, Margaret, where the story gets awkward again.
No, is he going to heel turn again? He keeps dancing.
More complicated than a heel turn.
Okay,
He's about to do a bad thing. There's a mitigating factor that's pretty significant.
Okay.
But it's a pretty bad thing. So Woody is at this point always on the verge of being broke, but also a famous and influential musician. And we know what comes with that, right? Which is the temptation to be a sex pest.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, Woody does not commit rape, but he does sexually harass someone very badly. And this is a very ugly story. The gist of it is that things with his second wife, Marjorie, go downhill as his career does. She is the family moneymaker. She actually makes a very good living teaching dancing. She's an extremely accomplished dancer. And his career is not doing well. This leads to fighting, and Woody eventually moves out and rents a room for himself. He starts writing letters to his old music partner, Lefty Lou's sister. She is 28 years old. He is 36. So they're not crazy far apart. But the bigger issue is she had never insinuated that she was into him, right? He is just writing her letters about wanting to fuck her apropos of nothing.
Oh, fuck.
Now, Woody had just kind of assumed that because they knew each other, right? They were friendly, but she gets divorced. And he just kind of assumes, well, I'm getting divorced too. That must mean she wants to fuck, right?
Yeah.
And his letters to her take on an air of obsession. He writes at least 12 long letters suggesting they move out together, hit the road, and start having sex. These letters include long, rambling descriptions of the kinds of sex Woody wanted to have, and more. And I'm going to quote from Ramblin' Man here. Into the envelopes, Guthrie stuffed pages torn from New York's tabloids with muddy magenta circles slathered around stories of grisly murders. The packets, sometimes 2 or 3 a week, frightened Mary Ruth by their intensity, the sexual proposals, and the suggestion of violence. She drove to Los Angeles to show them to her sister, who knew Guthrie best of all. "You have no idea how horrible it was," her older sister Maxine said. She, in turn, called the police. Now, the police get involved because they think Woody might be a budding serial killer, and given the kind of stuff he's sending, not an unreasonable thing to be afraid of.
Yeah.
And given the fact that the feds are hounding him, I get why Woody is like, this is them going after me for my politics, but it really isn't.
Yeah.
He's writing very upsetting things. Now, there's another part to this story, which does not make the things he's writing less fucked up or upsetting, but he is losing his mind.
Okay.
He is losing his mind in a degree that is very soon to be clinically diagnosed, right? In episode 1, I mentioned that Woody's mother went insane when he was quite young and was institutionalized, right? This traumatized him, and at the time, we didn't have an explanation for what she was going for. They just said madness, right? We now know what she had because Woody has it, and it's diagnosable by the time he gets it, and it's called Huntington's disease.
Oh.
Yeah, his mom and Woody gets it, and that is he is starting to suffer the effects of Huntington's by the late 40s. This is a neurodegenerative disorder that Huntington's disease news describes as characterized by uncontrolled movements, loss of cognitive ability, and psychiatric problems. The middle stages of the illness are associated with psychosis. Some patients experience delusions, which they tend to be convinced are accurate. And unfortunately, and it also comes with these like sort of obsessive delusions, right? Which might explain the whole him thinking that this was something that was reciprocated, right?
So this isn't a heel turn. This is just a degeneration. This
is a very tragic degeneration, right? Yeah. Which I don't know how, again, you want to parse it out morally, but like he is diagnosed, like he is losing his mind. He is going to spend most of the rest of his life in an institution. So this is not just a case of like a powerful man in music being a sex pest.
Right,
This
totally.
is a man who was not like this before, so far as we know, absolutely declining and becoming like increasingly delusional.
And like famous man sex pesting is fans. Famous man sex pesting is like, or everyone in your orbit, you just assume they want to fuck you, which I guess he's like doing to this. No, yeah, the degeneration thing, that just makes sense. It's just...
Yeah, he probably always had a crush on her, and then this, like, he becomes convinced that there is something going on there that there's not.
Right. But the fact that it was out of the blue to her means that he probably kept his fucking mouth shut about the fact that he had a crush on her.
One would assume, right? So it's not great. He is ultimately charged in 1949 with sending obscene material through the mail. He avoids prison time, but is sentenced to therapy. And he and his therapist do not have a good relationship. His therapist does not like him. I don't think it's known. He's not diagnosed yet with Huntington's, or I don't even know that Huntington's is, but he's not diagnosed with anything quite yet. So his therapist is just like, he's kind of an asshole, which I can't blame the therapist for, because he's being an asshole. If you don't know the mitigating factor of the family mental illness that destroyed his mother and is destroying him. Woody eventually refuses court-mandated therapy, and his lawyer manages to narrowly get him out of a 6-month sentence. His lawyer, who is one of his shipmates, right? He and this guy are torpedoed together, and this lawyer, who's a very good friend, who was like, I'm not gonna let my war buddy go to a fucking jail.
Right.
Woody was mostly angry when his sentence gets like cut off. He's kind of pissed because he had been planning a Christmas Eve show for the inmates that he doesn't get to do now. So there's still that piece of him in there, right? By the mid-1950s, Woody was disabled with Huntington's badly enough that his second wife, Marjorie, who he has separated from, had to take charge of his affairs. And it does say something that this person who he was not nice to at the end had enough affection for him still that she makes sure he's taken care of, right? Which included she registers a copyright for This Land Is Your Land for the first time, right? And for a number of his other songs. And she's doing that because, like, we're going to need some way of taking care of him, and this makes sense, right? As one of the fun side effects of this is that his family is going to wind up in a lawsuit with Donald Trump about This Land Is Your Land, because Trump kept trying to play it. They no longer have it is now in the public domain, but it wasn't for a while. So that same year, 1956, he was involuntarily committed to Greystone Park, a New Jersey mental institution. Over the next 5 years, he lost the ability to play music or even to type. But, and again, this really says something about the amount of love there was still for him. He is not cut off or alone. His family visits him regularly. They take him out and he stays with them for weekends and holidays. He's taken out and, taken to shows and trips by his friends and by fellow artists. Bob Dylan, who at this point is not particularly famous, starts visiting Woody at the asylum in 1961. and Dylan starts working with other performers over the 60s. They play shows. They take Woody to some of these shows where they're playing his music to this new generation of newly radicalized Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And Woody lives long enough to see his music honored in like sold out shows by some of the, like fucking Bob Dylan, some of the most beloved up and coming musicians of the 60s. So he does go out knowing that his music doesn't just live on, but is like, has influenced this new generation of people who are going to become incredibly famous and influential musicians in their own right. Which, as far as being an artist goes, is about as much as you can hope for.
Totally.
Yeah.
Especially for someone who's at the kind of beginning, not the very beginning of recorded music, but like
pretty close to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
He dies in October of 1967. At that point, he is unable to communicate by any means besides pointing at cards that said yes or no. But he left behind, again, a pretty incredible legacy. 2 novels, hundreds of articles, more than 1,000 songs and poems, 500 illustrations, and a central role in the folk music revival that changed American music forever. We've listened to a lot of Woody Guthrie's music in these episodes, and while I do hope you all take the opportunity to listen to more, I want to leave you with a quote of his that I think is quite relevant for our times, which Ed Cray picked out to open his 2008 biography of the man. About all a human being is, anyway, is just a hoping machine. And I like that. I also like this quote from Bob Dylan, who was asked in 1963 to sum up his feelings on Woody Guthrie in 25 words for a book on the man. As History.com notes, Dylan, quote, responded instead with a 194-line poem called Thoughts on Woody Guthrie, which took as its theme the eternal human search for hope. And where do you look for this hope you're seeking? Dylan asks in the poem, before proceeding to a kind of answer. You can either go to the church of your choice, or you can go to Brooklyn State Hospital. You'll find God in the church of your choice. You'll find Woody Guthrie in Brooklyn State Hospital.
Cool.
Yeah. Anyway, that's Woody Guthrie.
That was awesome.
Yeah. I knew so little about him. I know about some of his music, and it's been super influential, but that's awesome.
Yeah. It was one of those, like, again, it's a messy story, but yeah.
Honestly, it was better than I would have guessed.
Yeah. Great pick for the non-bastard holiday episode.
A relevant kind of guy to know about for the kind of times we're heading into.
Yeah.
And speaking of somebody people should know about, I adopted a second dog.
Yes,
Hello.
You did. This is Anderson's sister, Truman. She's
woot, woot.
She's learning how to be a dog, but she's a good girl.
She's already a good podcast dog, which is a hard level for a dog
hard
to reach.
Job. Yeah, especially a herding dog.
Yeah,
you're a good girl. Yeah. So I guess just to say, happy holidays, everyone.
I
hope
happy holidays. And I don't know. Listen to some Woody Guthrie.
Yeah. We'll be back in the new year, or the first week of the year. We'll have a couple of Q&A episodes.
We'll have some Q's. We'll answer some A's. It'll be a good time.
Any final thoughts, Magpie? Anything you want to plug?
Well, if you want Christmas every week, I have a podcast called Cool People Who Did Cool Stuff, where I talk about cool people who did cool stuff. And then either this week or next week, depending on when everything gets released, I also will be covering the history of the song Bella Ciao, because I got excited by this recording last week of part 1, and I thought, I'm going to do a song too.
It will be the week after. You'll be releasing that. Yep.
So next Monday, you all can hear me talk about the history of Bella Ciao.
Awesome. All right.
Merry Christmas or whatever you want to have happy.
Well, that'll do it. Yeah. That'll do it for year 2024. Wow.
2024. Yeah, more or less.
More or less. All right.
Yeah.
Be well. Bye-bye.